Nothing personal, Stephen. Dylan needs real leadership experience, Jonathan said, sliding the termination papers across his desk. After 19 years building his empire, I was being replaced by his 28-year-old son. I nodded calmly and said, I understand completely. What Jonathan didn't know was that my response would destroy everything he'd built. My name is Stephen Mills. I'm 47 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I was the Chief Operations Officer at Hartwell Industries in Denver, Colorado. For nearly 2 decades, I'd transformed Jonathan's struggling manufacturing company from a 12-employee operation into a $150 million industrial powerhouse with facilities across 3 states. I wasn't surprised by the termination. The writing had been on the wall for months. Dylan Hartwell had been shadowing me in meetings, asking pointed questions about my processes and making suggestions that showed he fundamentally misunderstood our business model. What surprised me was Jonathan's timing. He'd chosen to fire me exactly 3 weeks before our biggest contract renewal with Rockford Energy, worth $45 million annually, a contract I'd personally negotiated and maintained for 8 years. The severance package is generous, Jonathan continued, not meeting my eyes. 6 months' salary, full benefits through the end of the year. I glanced at the papers. Standard termination language, a non-compete clause, and a confidentiality agreement. Nothing about the intellectual property I'd developed or the client relationships I'd built. When does Dylan officially take over? I asked. Monday. We're announcing the transition at the board meeting. I stood up, shook Jonathan's hand, and walked out of his corner office for the last time as an employee. As I passed Dylan's cubicle, he looked up from his laptop with a smirk that made my jaw tighten. Exciting times ahead, Stephen, he said loudly enough for nearby employees to hear. Time to bring this company into the modern era. I just nodded and kept walking. Dylan had no idea what he was inheriting, and Jonathan had no idea what he was losing. I started at Hartwell Industries in 2005 when Jonathan was desperate. His father's manufacturing company was hemorrhaging money, losing clients to overseas competitors. I was 28 then, freshly laid off and hungry to prove myself. Jonathan offered me half my previous salary, but also the chance to build something from the ground up. Within 2 years, I'd streamlined production processes, negotiated better supplier contracts, and landed our first major client, Rockford Energy. Jonathan promoted me to operations manager with a small equity stake. Over the next decade, I systematically expanded our capabilities. I convinced Jonathan to invest in new equipment, helped design facilities in Phoenix and Salt Lake City, and recruited management teams for each location. By 2018, Hartwell Industries was the premier industrial parts manufacturer in the Mountain West. We employed over 300 people and maintained contracts with Fortune 500 companies. Jonathan rewarded my efforts with promotions and eventually the COO title. But he'd never given me true partnership in the company I'd helped save. The first warning sign came when Dylan graduated business school. Jonathan started bringing him to company events as the future of Hartwell Industries. Dylan would nod seriously while contributing nothing to operational conversations. In March, Dylan joined as a management trainee. His training consisted of sitting in my meetings, taking notes, and asking questions that revealed his complete ignorance of manufacturing. Why maintain so much inventory? He asked during a production review. Wouldn't just-in-time delivery be more efficient? I explained that clients required guaranteed delivery schedules and manufacturing delays could cost millions. Dylan nodded but wasn't really listening. By June, Dylan was attending client meetings, fumbling through presentations using business school buzzwords that made clients' eyes glaze over. The breaking point came during our quarterly review with Rockford Energy. Dylan interrupted my presentation to suggest we could disrupt the traditional supplier relationship by implementing blockchain technology. Mark Thompson, Rockford's procurement director, looked at me with confusion. After the meeting, he pulled me aside. "Stephen, what's going on? That kid doesn't understand our business." "Growing pains," I said diplomatically. "Jonathan's preparing the next generation." Mark nodded, but remained concerned. "Our contract renewal is coming up. We need to work with people who understand our requirements." I started documenting everything. Every failed initiative Dylan proposed, every client complaint, every operational detail he misunderstood. I also began updating personal files, storing critical information securely off-site. 3 months ago, I discovered something Jonathan had forgotten. A key man insurance policy worth $2 million with documentation stating I was essential to continued operation and that my departure would result in significant financial losses. I'd quietly shared this information with Patricia Walsh, an employment attorney I'd consulted about my equity stake years earlier. She'd reviewed my situation and confirmed what I suspected. Jonathan was making a catastrophic mistake. "Stephen," she'd said, "if he terminates you without cause, especially with this insurance documentation, you have a strong case for wrongful termination. But more importantly, you might be able to claim ownership of the client relationships and processes you've developed." The morning after my termination, I implemented the first phase of my plan. I called Mark Thompson at Rockford Energy and requested a personal meeting. We met at a coffee shop downtown, away from both our offices. "Mark," I said, "I need to inform you that I'm no longer with Hartwell Industries. Jonathan terminated my position yesterday." Mark's expression darkened. "Are you serious? 3 weeks before our contract renewal?" "I'm afraid so. Dylan will be handling the Rockford relationship going forward." Mark set down his coffee cup hard enough to spill some on the table. "Stephen, that kid couldn't handle ordering office supplies, let alone managing our manufacturing requirements." "I understand your concern. What are your plans?" I'd been waiting for that question. "I'm considering starting my own consulting firm, helping manufacturers improve their operations and client relationships." Mark leaned forward. "Would you be interested in consulting on the Rockford account? We could structure it as a third-party quality assurance arrangement. I'd have to check the non-compete clause in my severance agreement, but it might be possible." We talked for another hour. By the time I left, Mark had made it clear that Rockford's contract renewal with Hartwell Industries was far from guaranteed, especially without me involved in the relationship. I made similar calls to contacts at 3 other major clients over the next 2 days. The responses were uniformly negative. Our clients had trusted Hartwell Industries because they trusted me. Without that personal relationship, they saw no reason to continue paying premium prices for services they could get elsewhere. Thursday afternoon, I received a call from Dylan. "Stephen, we need to talk. There seems to be some confusion about the Rockford Energy renewal." I was sitting in the office space I'd just leased downtown, watching contractors install network equipment. "What kind of confusion?" "They're asking for documentation about our quality control processes that I can't find. And they want to meet with you specifically about the renewal terms." "I'm no longer employed by Hartwell Industries, Dylan. I can't represent the company in client meetings." "But you developed those processes. Surely you remember the details." "I developed many processes over 19 years. The documentation should be in the company files." Dylan's voice took on a pleading tone. "Stephen, my father says you took copies of important documents when you left. We need those files." "I took personal items from my desk. Company documents remain company property." "Then why won't Rockford deal with me directly?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Client relationships are built on trust and expertise, Dylan. Both take time to develop." After I hung up, I called Patricia Walsh. "They're starting to panic. How long before they realize the full scope of the problem?" "Give it another week," she said. "Once the other clients start expressing concerns, Jonathan will understand what he's lost." Friday brought 3 more calls from Dylan, each more desperate than the last. By the following Tuesday, Jonathan himself was calling. Stephen, I think we need to discuss your departure. There seem to be some issues with client relationships that we didn't anticipate. What kind of issues? Rockford is threatening to pull their contract. Phoenix Materials wants to renegotiate their rates. And Mesa Industrial is asking about your availability for consulting work. I let the silence stretch. Jonathan had fired me exactly 2 weeks ago, and his empire was already crumbling. Stephen, I may have been hasty in my decision. Would you consider returning as a consultant? We could work out a generous arrangement. I appreciate the offer, Jonathan, but I've already committed to other projects. What other projects? Several of your former clients have expressed interest in my consulting services. I'm helping them evaluate their supplier relationships. Another long pause. You can't do that. The non-compete clause prevents you from working with our clients. Actually, Jonathan, you might want to have your lawyer review that clause more carefully. Patricia had identified a critical flaw in the non-compete agreement. It prevented me from working for direct competitors, but it said nothing about consulting with Hartwell's clients to help them improve their supplier relationships. If watching incompetent nepotism get destroyed by experience and strategy makes your day, hit subscribe. Stephen's masterpiece is just getting started. The following Monday, I received a formal cease and desist letter from Hartwell Industries' legal team. They were demanding I stop all contact with their clients and return any confidential information I'd allegedly stolen. I forwarded the letter to Patricia, who responded with her own letter explaining why their demands were legally baseless and potentially defamatory. More importantly, I sent copies of both letters to my contacts at Rockford Energy, Phoenix Materials, and Mesa Industrial. Nothing builds trust like transparency, and my former clients appreciated seeing how Hartwell Industries was handling the transition. Mark Thompson called me within hours of receiving the documents. Stephen, this is insane. They're threatening to sue you for talking to us? Apparently so. Well, I've got news for you. Our legal team has reviewed the Hartwell contract and we're invoking the key personnel clause. If you're not involved in our account management, we're terminating the agreement. 3 days later, Phoenix Materials made the same decision. Mesa Industrial followed the next week. Within a month of my termination, Hartwell Industries had lost $78 million in annual contracts. Dylan's leadership experience was proving very expensive for his father. The calls from Jonathan became daily occurrences. Stephen, you're destroying everything we built together. No, Jonathan, you destroyed it when you chose nepotism over competence. Name your price, equity stake, salary, whatever you want. It's not about money anymore. Then what is it about? Respect. You threw away 19 years of partnership like it meant nothing. Now you're learning what those 19 years were actually worth. 2 months later, Patricia received a settlement offer. Jonathan was willing to pay $3 million for a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and an end to my consulting activities. I declined and made a counteroffer. Purchase Hartwell's client contracts for $5 million. Jonathan could keep the facilities, but the relationships would transfer to Mills Industrial Solutions. His response was immediate and profane. But 6 weeks later, after more client defections and forced layoffs, he called back asking to discuss my proposal. We met at Patricia's law firm. Jonathan looked aged, defeated. Dylan sat silently beside him, his earlier smugness completely gone. Your offer is highway robbery, Jonathan began. My offer is generous. Your client base is worthless without the relationships to maintain it. Patricia presented documented client defections since my termination. The remaining contracts were worth $32 million annually, but renewal rates were projected at less than 30% without my involvement. $5 million for contracts worth $32 million annually? Jonathan questioned. $5 million for contracts you're losing anyway, Patricia replied, plus guaranteed subcontracting work for 2 years while you rebuild. The negotiation took 6 hours. By the end, we'd reached an agreement. I would acquire the client contracts, accounts receivable, and intellectual property rights I'd developed over 19 years. Jonathan would retain ownership of the facilities and equipment. Most importantly, Dylan would no longer have any role in client relationship management. 1 year later, Mills Industrial Solutions had grown to 85 employees and $95 million in annual revenue. We'd retained 90% of the transferred clients and acquired 8 new major accounts. Hartwell Industries had stabilized as a smaller operation focused on manufacturing and fulfillment. Jonathan had learned to appreciate the steady subcontracting work we provided, and Dylan had found his calling in marketing and business development rather than operations. I was reviewing expansion plans in my new corner office when my assistant announced that Jonathan Hartwell was here to see me. I found him in the lobby looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. "Hello, Jonathan." "Stephen, congratulations on the Manufacturing Excellence Award. Well deserved." "Thank you. What brings you by?" "I wanted to apologize. What I did was wrong. I let family obligation cloud my business judgment." I gestured to the sitting area. "Apology accepted. I also wanted to propose something. Dylan's been asking about opportunities to learn the operations side of the business. Would you consider taking him on as an intern, unpaid, just for the learning experience?" I thought about it. Dylan had matured considerably over the past year. His marketing work for Hartwell Industries had actually been quite good. I'd be willing to discuss it, but he'd start at the bottom, learning manufacturing processes before touching any client relationships. Jonathan smiled. "I think that's exactly what he needs." As he prepared to leave, Jonathan paused. "You know, in a way, this worked out better for everyone. You got the company you deserved to build. I kept the company I was capable of running. And Dylan learned that leadership has to be earned." After he left, I walked through the facility, watching my team coordinate production schedules with client requirements. These were people who'd followed me from Hartwell Industries, who'd trusted my vision over Jonathan's family politics. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying what someone built. Sometimes it's building something better and showing them what real leadership looks like. Jonathan had thought he could replace 19 years of expertise with a family name and an MBA. Instead, he'd learned that loyalty can't be inherited, trust can't be delegated, and competence can't be faked. The company I'd built was stronger than the one I'd left, and the relationships I'd developed were deeper than any contract. That was worth more than any severance package or settlement agreement. In the end, Jonathan's decision to replace me with Dylan hadn't just cost him money. It had cost him the future I'd been building for his company. But it had given me something more valuable, the chance to build that future for myself.